Agatha, you fucking cheated. Cheers.
It is the end of May, and we are discussing our May books that we picked for each other.
Yes.
This video is discussing the book that I picked for Hannah, which was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. So our prompt was books with a map, which obviously for Hannah and fantasy was quite easy. For me, I really had to think, and this book does have a very small map halfway through, like at some point.
Somewhere
So I used that as an opportunity to get Hannah reading her first Agatha Christie. Do we want to start with just a short sort of spoiler-free review and star rating?
No, I'm just gonna start talking. All right, it's spoilers. Okay, so The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. So, okay, here's the thing, right? I'm reading this book, and by like chapter 5 or something, I'm like, who the fuck is James? I didn't even register that the POV I was in was not the detective.
Oh,
So I was
yeah.
like, I must have missed something, and I was like, what the, is this like a small town thing? He's a doctor and the detective. Like, what the fuck is going on? And then Caroline's like, James. I'm like, what, who the fuck? So right away, off the bat, I'm like...
Were you like, I need to reread the last 5 chapters?
Like, well, okay, so it's not really drawing me in that much, is it, that I'm fucking confused about the character. I struggled with the writing of this. When I saw that it is published originally in like 1920 something, I was like, oh, okay, she's an old bitch.
It's a
like,
very, very different style of writing. Yeah, for sure.
that did give me a better perspective. I'm not sure, like, it's so obviously not like the 1980s, like, I'm not sure what I was thinking. So we're following James, and he's the doctor in this small town, and he's dealing with a lady has been found dead, and it's believed to be suicide. There's no note, but there's like no obvious foul play, and then quite quickly the deceased woman is meant to be the fiance, I believe, of Roger Ackroyd.
Yeah.
But Roger Ackroyd is then promptly murdered at the very start of the book. And the entire novel is about figuring out who murdered Roger Ackroyd. Now, this is my first murder mystery, so I have nothing to base it on in terms of like genre specific. Sorry, am I banging?
Which for this book in particular might have actually been helpful.
Okay, why?
Because this is a departure, and why this book was so...
A departure?
Why this book was so, like, sent shockwaves, but was because it was so different. Its ending was very different to regular murder mystery novels.
How else do they end?
Well, this is now, it's full spoilers,
full spoilers
now.
Full spoilers,
The
bitches.
murderer was the narrator.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was unheard of in Agatha Christie's books and in just murder mystery novels in general.
Right, okay, so I was reading this and I was like a few chapters in, obviously I'm like, James, hi James, like the novel's taken on a whole new thing. Now I realise you're not the detective. The detective is Hercule Poirot. He's the neighbour of James, and he gets asked to help out on the case. And so we're following along. There's lots of people who are suspects. And I am sometimes bored as fucking shit in this story. The thing is, and I say this in my vlog, I'm sorry if you just are such a fan, if you like watch my vlog and this, which I highly doubt you have. I am like, but the person's already been murdered. I don't care. The tension's gone.
Oh, then this is not, this genre is not for you.
Like, I just don't care. I'm like, who done it? I'm like, tell me.
It doesn't care. It's been done.
Oh, right? Like, there's just, okay, thrillers I get. This I'm just like, oh, okay. Let me tell you, I had like I don't even want to call it a thought because it almost didn't form. I just kind of had this moment where I was like, why have we not suspected James? And it barely popped into my head so quickly. It was like, of course it's not the doctor. And, you know, like all of the reasons why it's not, like, I didn't even think it. Let me tell you, when I fucking had this little French man accuse James, I screamed out loud. I literally, like, dropped my shit. Like, I was like shook, absolutely shook. And then I quite quickly was like, Agatha, you fucking cheated. All right,
That is why this book is very controversial.
I am not sure I'm okay with that, because we are,
I have my arguments ready and ready.
we are in first person. You, what, tell me your arguments, because you're in first person.
The biggest argument is that James never lies. He lies by omission, but he never says anything that is untrue. Everything he says happened, and how it happened did happen. He just left out the bit where he murdered someone. But he didn't lie. And my thoughts are that in any novel, when you're presented with all the information in a murder mystery novel, you know that when Hercule Poirot, if it was from his perspective, that when he's talking to Nancy or Jane or whoever, that when he asks them a question and they say something, they might be omitting something, they might be lying, and it's up to you to figure it out. And James is just another one of those characters. Sure, you're hearing it from his perspective, but at the end of the day, he is still just telling what happened from his perspective. And if anything, yeah, he did the courtesy of he didn't lie. But he did omit things.
So I guess the argument is, like, obviously when you're in the character's head, you're not, like, hearing them be like, I'm gonna, like, take a piss now. Like, you don't literally hear every thought that happens. What am I having for breakfast? Like, I understand that, but it's kind of like...
You think the tone would have been different?
I don't know. It's like...
should have been?
It's like, can you really... It feels almost, like, clumsy. Like, I don't know. Can you really be in someone's head who is the murderer, and the entire book is about finding the murderer, and yet we never have them think anything?
Okay, but see, now we bring up another point. Are we in his head, or is he talking to us? Because that's two different things.
Yeah.
In the novel, he is kind of talking to us.
He is.
It's not written like third-person narrative kind of vibes where, like, we're seeing everything from his perspective in the sense that we're experiencing it with him. It's more he is telling us what's going on, and he's just omitting what happened, and he's,
the way he does phrase stuff. Caroline does seem to do that, you know. She blah, 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 always talks shit about people. Like, it does kind of feel like he's talking at you.
As opposed to us being in his head.
I don't know. It kind of like, it jumped from 3 stars to 5 stars in that moment, and then I kind of came back to 4.
Because you were like...
Because I was like, I'm not sold, but I'm not sold. There are moments in the book, like there's a moment where the sister Caroline, they're talking about, oh no, so-and-so couldn't have done that because they're weak, and then the detective makes this comment like, yeah, but how far does weakness go? And I did remember that moment, and I remember, because she's calling her brother weak. She's saying James is weak or something.
Yeah.
And he's making a comment, and almost in that moment, like, I feel like if I reread that, I'm like, is that like the detective nodding that he's onto James? Because it is. It's like this idea of like murder as weakness. Like, I feel like I could have fucking murdered people. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you just feel so angry. You're like...
Oh, 100%.
If I had a club, you know what I mean?
If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time,
like,
with the right circumstances.
Homicide, you know, like, I'm like,
it
it's
happens.
Strength,
like how we just easily just like, we're just like, look, anyone could murder someone.
No, but anyone could murder someone.
But yeah.
Like, it's self-control. Okay, so in the, massive tangent, in the Dunedin study, which is like the biggest longitude study that's like ever been done, it's like won awards and shit.
For context, she's meaning it's a study where they studied a group of people from birth all the way up until they're now in their like 40s, 50s.
They're old.
And they've studied like a whole wide range of things, so you can like pinpoint all the stuff.
Like they just study these people and everything about their life.
that happens.
Do you know what the number one takeaway that they have taken from this study, which is absolutely incredible? The number one takeaway factor that they have said is required to have a good life: self-control. This is why people with ADHD and other like disorders, syndromes, like whatever you want to call it, have a harder time. You make less money, career, difficulty with relationships, career, housing, like all of the facets of life. Self-control is massive because it's literally the difference between getting to work on time and not. Saying that mean thing to your friend and not.
Oh, stop. This is giving me like...
Right, like it's massive.
PTSD.
This massive study, that is what they've said. So that's what I think of when they're like weakness. It's like, you know, we think of like murder as this like, whoa, you can never do that. And it's like actually weak people murder people. Like they give in to this primal feeling. Because like back in the day, humans used to kill. Like,
yeah, of course.
Out of like...
This is the thing,
a survival type thing.
100%. This is the thing that like you would have had to, as like cavemen times, you have to go out and hunt your own meat. You have to kill an animal to eat an animal.
Yeah, and like back then there was no, I mean, I'm like pro-abolish prisons, but there were no kind of systems in place. I'm pretty sure the reason why Homo sapiens are here is because they murdered all the other fucking like
animals and predators and
no,
whatever.
like they murdered the other species, like the other versions of humans.
Yeah, like the Neanderthals.
Yeah, like they wiped those bitches out. So it's like
I think there's some Neanderthals still around. Joking, that's mean.
That's mean. Neanderthals are actually not dumb at all.
They're not.
And also we're probably fucking from Neanderthals because we're white. So it's like that's very like that, like our dinosaur brains are inclined to just
kill.
React, right? So what I think is really interesting is we get the last chapter from him. And he's like just casually talking about how he's going to kill himself. He writes a letter, or he writes his novel, and he's like arrogantly like, oh, I thought this was going to be the first case that Hercule Poirot like couldn't solve. And then he's casually talking about how he doesn't think it's his fault that the lady committed suicide because she was being blackmailed by him. And then he's just like, oh, so how should I do it? Wait, yeah, where's the line?
That's, yeah, this is almost getting now into, like, trigger warning stuff, but the
whole thing is
the whole thing warning. Actually is. It's a really interesting area looking at what is a true suicide versus someone pushing you to do something you wouldn't have done if they weren't in the picture. So like if he wasn't blackmailing her, this wouldn't have happened. She wouldn't have killed herself, and therefore is it truly suicide?
Yeah.
Or is it a murder but they used the person as the weapon
through coercion or something? Yeah. Okay, so this is the last thing. He's finished writing his manuscript and he's addressing it to Poirot. And then, what shall it be? Veronal? There would be a kind of poetic justice, because I believe that's what the chick took. Not that I take any responsibility for Miss Ferreira's death. It was the direct consequence of her own actions. I feel no pity for her. I have no pity for myself either. So let it be Veronal. But I wish Hercule Poirot had never retired from work and come here to grow vegetable marrows. So we also have the fact that he inserts himself so heavily into the investigation.
Which is one of those
Classic.
things of if we weren't getting it from his perspective, like him being the narrator really threw everyone off. If it was from someone else's perspective and you saw him inserting himself
Getting
so much,
so involved.
you would have picked him up a lot sooner.
Yeah.
Like I think we assume he's so involved purely as a plot device because he's telling the story, and instead of actually taking it as part of the plot.
Yeah, to be honest, like, it's almost so obvious that's why you miss it. Like, hiding in plain sight kind of vibes.
Yeah. For me, it reminds me very much of one of her other most famous ones, The Murder on the Orient Express. Do you ever want to read that?
I do. I think I need to read another one.
Okay, then I can't say.
Oh, okay, don't say. I think, like, this is the thing. So I give it 4 stars. I think that the audiobook is what did this for me. I think if I had read, I read like a third of it with my eyes.
Yeah.
And then I did the rest on audio, and I just don't know if I could have got through it reading it myself. Like, the accents were annoying at the start, then they were kind of fun, and like, okay, how do I explain it? The writing was annoying me. But then the accents made it like, it felt like I was watching like an old school movie. So
this is the thing.
It gave the writing context.
And it's just, they are very dry books, like they can be. I think you're too clouded by your own love for them if you don't admit they're dry. Like, they are. And so if you're not super inclined to wanting to these sorts of books, it can be boring, to be honest.
And like, because every chapter is almost like at the end, I do like how we get, like, every chapter is like titled after, like, Hercule Poirot is like, oh, everybody here is hiding something, and then the rest of the book, it's like every chapter kind of, we find out what each character is hiding, and it shows you how someone can be hiding something. So like, for example, his niece like stole from him, and so she lies and says that she had gone in to see him at 9:45, but she actually was not seen in the room or coming out of the room. She was seen in the hallway because she had in fact been in his quarters stealing from him, which of course she wanted to lie about. So she lied and said she said goodnight to him, which then of course the murderer, James, is like, this bitch is saying she saw him. He was dead. So he's like, well, I can't say anything, but I'm like, what? So I think that was kind of interesting, like, reflecting on the things that were surprising him.
Yeah, and I just think what I like about these books, and when you are trying to solve a murder, that sort of thing, it really throws up that at any moment we don't realize how full everyone's lives are with so many things going on. So like, you're all maybe at dinner with your family and a few friends and maybe a random aunt, and if something were to happen, like, the amount of just absolute shit, like so much shit and messiness that would come up that just simmers below the surface in everyone's lives. Everyone has something.
So I have an example of this. We had a family weekend, and one person was getting annoyed, like they were bitching to me because they were like, so-and-so's like hasn't been helping all morning and they're not here on this family trip. And then we find out from my mother-in-law that they had like a thing happen the night before that was like really bad and
really contextual,
like,
importantly.
It's like, and so she was like, oh, I didn't want to like gossip or share business. I'm like, we're family. That's not gossip. That's context, because you've had other family members stewing all day for being tired and overwhelmed themselves. But this person actually like had something happen to them that then gives reason for why they were sitting around not helping and why they were not coming on the family trip.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I mean there was like 10 children. So when I'm like family trip, I mean like we're fucking looking after all these children.
Yeah. This is like on a much lower scale.
But like I'm like, no, I would literally, she was like, oh, I was like, no, you literally have to share that information. I'm not saying we need to talk about it. I don't need to know anything else.
Yeah.
But I need to know these things. Like,
this is what happened to me on a lower scale, which was kind of a lesson for me. Oh, it's a lesson for me, but I'm on both sides. I had to quit. Oh god, it sounds so nerdy. I had to quit my theatre sports team because my grandma died, and it brought up a lot of anxiety for me. I had a bit of a breakdown, and I had to cut back on my extracurriculars. And I told my teammates first, like some of my teammates and it was like two of my teammates who I weren't as close with, and I just said like, I came up with something. I don't know what it was, but I was just like, you know, whatever. And I was going to tell our coach, who I was really, really close with, I was going to tell her the real reason and be vulnerable to be like, you know, and
she found out through them.
She found out through them. They just kind of went and told her like, oh yeah, Emily's too busy, so she's not going to do it. And this is like...
Oh, and Emily's like the boss. Like, she's like the fucking funniest. Like her and her friend, they're like up there in the theatre sports. Like
we were key players.
Yeah, they were key players.
But and we'd been like, this was like
Star
our
players
third year.
quitting.
It was our third year. We'd done really, really well. We had put the school on the map. It was like we were the first to go to like the inter-school, like the next level. So like for me to quit, I didn't want her to think I was just quitting so blasé, and I was so pissed off. Yeah. And it was one of those things I was like, oh, is that on me? Is that on them? Personally, I still stand it was on them.
Oh,
and they shouldn't have.
It was not their business.
It was not their news to share. But yeah, just things are always, there's
it's not
always
like you weren't going to
more,
tell her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is always, so yeah, just to bring it back to this, just there's always so much context. And what's the issue with there being so much context and people have so many different things going on in their lives? That is why you can find so many different suspects for a crime that aren't true, that aren't real.
And this is why the wrong people like
get convicted.
And
that's why prison is, yeah, it's a whole other thing.
So yeah, 4 stars. Highly recommend the audiobook. I think, and the audiobook was only like 6.5 hours. Oh, such a good time.
Road trip.
Honestly, like anytime I'm like maybe I'll listen to it on the way home. Like any audiobook that's like 9 hours, I'm like, oh, I don't want to commit to you. But I genuinely could like listen to one of her books on the way home. Here's the thing, I was like, this is like reading the thrillers and the Agatha Christie's. I'm like, I'm really loving it. And like in the same way, I feel like you're loving reading the fantasy romance and the romances. You're not like, I'm not like, oh, I'm a general fic reader now. Because I feel like there are people who read general fiction, including romance. Like they read everything. Same way I don't think you're like, I'm a romance reader. But it's like, oh no, this is in my repertoire now.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, that's me. Yay!